Hello.
Greg, hi. Greg is the co-author of the official Cambridge IELTS course, Mindset for IELTS, and he's an experienced teacher and teacher trainer. A trained IELTS examiner in both writing and speaking, Greg is currently working at an international college in Cambridge, where he teaches IELTS and EAP classes. He has extensive experience working with students whose ambition is to enter a UK or English-speaking university. So, over to you, Greg.
Thank you, Jessica. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Good morning. Well, good morning from me. Could be good afternoon. Could even be good evening. I think there are one or two people who are kind of about sort of 8 or 9 hours in front of us here in Cambridge. So, welcome to you as much as everybody else. Hope you had a lovely dinner or something. So today we're going to be chatting about this idea of figuring out what to do with our students in terms of getting them to realise what the examiner wants to see and what the examiner is looking for. And also for yourself, how to kind of think about that as well and look at what is being set out, what are the criteria and how we can get our students and our learners to understand what they are and develop their language skills to accommodate that and to get the best scores that they possibly can. So without further ado, because we got quite a lot to get through, let's think about the plan of action. As Jessica said, I authored on mindset for IELTS. I'm going to be dipping into this a couple of times today for a couple of bits I wrote for level 3. Just so you know straight away, level 3 is aimed at candidates who are aiming at band 6.5 and past that. But what I'm going to be talking about, really, you don't need to have a learner who is at that level. It is scalable, the principles that I'm talking about, and it could work from 6.5 downwards. So, what are we going to be looking at today? Well, it's this. As I say, we're looking at how to get people that we teach to understand what the examiner is looking for, what the test criteria set out, and to help them develop their language to be able to do that. This is the important thing. Very often people think that they can just kind of get the skills that are needed and learn how to do IELTS, but essentially it is a language test and it's about language use. We're going to be looking at how you as teachers can use the band descriptors, the public band descriptors, to inform your teaching and to help your learners understand whether they're doing enough to reach a certain level, a certain band. And we're going to be doing some work in thinking about the function, how a function of an idea or a sentence can actually help students to plan and to write essays. We're looking at task 2 exclusively. There isn't really enough time to look at anything in task 1 today. So those public band descriptors. I have made this mistake before of just plopping down an A4 sheet of band descriptors in front of a student and saying, there you go, that's what that's what the examiner's looking for. How would you assess your own work? And it can look quite daunting. If you don't really know what you're looking at or looking for, well, where do you start? Band task response, coherence, cohesion, what are these numbers down the side? And I find that really a lot of the time, many of my students in the past have had the idea that if I want to get a high score in my IELTS paper, all I need to do with my writing is just fix the grammar. And if they attend to their grammar and they don't make any mistakes, then that will give them the highest score possible and they can leave happy. Well, as we all know, if you've had this experience as well, it's kind of, that doesn't work. That is not how you go about it at all. So, we have a problem. In that raising awareness of what the band descriptors are, how they work, and what the examiner is looking for, giving a sheet of the complete band descriptors, I don't think is a good way of doing it. But we need them to understand what the function is and what they're doing there with them. So a little while ago, I thought, how do we do this? How do we get them to understand what the examiner is looking for without this idea of, there you go, read that? What can we give them? I am a language teacher, as you all are out there, and I think it's that the best thing that we can do as language teachers is work from a text. In this case, in IELTS, work from a script. to get them to understand what the examiner's doing, how the examiner is working objectively. And this is the important thing. The examiner looks at things objectively. And I thought, well, let's think about working from a text, working from a script, and getting them to think about what the examiner would be doing if they're looking at that text. We could go about this, I thought initially, by getting them to analyse their own writing and adopting the position of an examiner. But the problem with that is that it's not necessarily particularly objective. It doesn't particularly enable them to understand it, because they're very self-critical. People can be very self-critical of their writing, and in a way they can't see the wood for the trees. They get fixated on what mistakes they've made, on what they haven't done well enough. So I don't think self-marking would be the way into this idea. So I thought, let's have a think. Could we do this with a peer marking? Could we use a classmate's bit of work and get that student to be an examiner looking at their classmate's bit of work? Well, I think here we have the opposite problem. And that is the fact that often there are friendships, there are relationships between classmates and peers, and they step back a little bit, and they don't want to come across as being, in any way harsh. And this is the whole point. If you want to get into the mindset of the examiner, you need that objectivity. So then I thought, well, how about if they think they are marking, if they're marking an unknown classmate? Which is an interesting idea, I thought. And by this I mean, I tell them, I'm going to give you a piece of writing that was done by somebody who used to be in this class. And that's it gives them that connection to the class, but there's no personal, empathetic link with it. And they do very well in this. They can get that objectivity. So much to the extent that they are often like absolute vultures when it's somebody they don't know, and they can pick it apart perhaps a bit too much. But this is the point that I started from. And what I do is I say, I'm going to give you this a question that a student of mine previously wrote an answer to. And I'm going to give you the question, and then I'm going to give you a paragraph. Okay, first of all, here is the question. I'd like you to read that. Okay. And then I say, here is a section of, it's only a paragraph of this ex-student, my previous student's writing. Have a look at it, and I would like you to think, would this impress the examiner? Okay, so I'm going to put it on here. If you feel like it, into the chat box, yes or no, would this impress the examiner as you read it? I'll give you about 30 seconds to read. Okay. Is this something that would impress the examiner? Yes or no? Well, what happens, I find, is that this instinct kicks in with the students. They read this, and the first instinct is grammar and vocabulary. Grammar is wrong. The grammar's all wrong. People are needing. No, people need. A big change can to be. That's bad grammar. Strong, there have many reasons. You don't say have many reasons. But this is it. This is the first instinct is to first of all, let's correct the grammar. Check the grammar first. Now I say to them, I don't want you to look at the grammar. I don't want you to look at the vocabulary. I want you to look purely at one thing only. And that thing is, how would you improve this paragraph in terms of task response? Okay, how much you pre-teach the idea of task response is up to you. If you've got kind of quite an autonomous group, then you can just give them this as it stands here. But perhaps teach the ideas of what task response is, and I might pre-teach the idea of a position, the writer setting out a position. But the questions are there essentially to take those band descriptors and ask the questions as they could be answered by anybody who doesn't understand band descriptors. What do you think about the way how does the writer set out the position? Does the paragraph answer the question? Is the last, what about that last sentence? So I get them to think about this purely from the idea of task response. Do not correct any grammar. Don't look at the vocabulary. And the fact is that this writer does set out a position in a way. They say there are many strong reason why people need to make big changes to their life sometimes. That's kind of, I expect a particular angle from that paragraph. But there are problems here with task response. It doesn't set out a single position. It doesn't develop the ideas. It doesn't go into supporting the ideas at all. And the students can see this. And also from that last sentence is a very useful one to kind of point out something that a lot of students think they can do, and indeed do in text. That last sentence there was clearly memorized, because if you look at the quality of the language, there's some really high-level hypothetical language. There's some less common collocations. And this is a good way to illustrate to students, you've got to read the question properly. Because this student saw the word change in the question and thought, I know, I've got a good sentence about change. If I put this in, it's good grammar, it will impress my teacher, it will impress the examiner. And that really does not happen at all. So it's a good way to illustrate the fact that you have to come up with these ideas and you have to develop them. So then I say to the students, okay, well, yeah, you're absolutely right. That's not effective. It doesn't do well in task response. I then told the student that very same idea. It's not good. I'm not going to mark it. You've memorized that. So go away and try again. And then they came back and they gave me a second draft. This student who used to be in my class. And then I give my current students the second draft, a paragraph again. And the paragraph, I say to them, for this one, completely ignore what you did before. I don't want you to think about how well this is answering the question. All I want you to think about here is this: coherence and cohesion. Do the writer link their ideas well? Does it flow? Is it difficult to read? Is there much repetition? What about reference? Is there any of that? And you get them again to sort of make notes on analysis. Depending on how long you've got with them, you could get them to try and even rewrite the paragraph as a whole. So again, I will give you just 30 seconds to read this paragraph. And again, here's my question. Just type into the chat box, is this paragraph easy to read? Okay. Is it easy to read? No, we've got a couple of no's coming through, and I think this will. Um, I don't think it's easy to read at all. I think it kind of confuses me, and this is a very, very interesting thing because it depends on where you come from culturally. Because this doesn't work for me as an English-speaking UK IELTS reading English type of academic context. It is very difficult to read, and it's about the coherence, it's about the flow. And the problem is, disregarding grammar and vocabulary, it doesn't flow, it doesn't connect. But it would do much better if, I think, if you change the position of two of the sentences. Okay? So it suddenly becomes much easier to read if you change the position of two of the sentences. So I'm going to hand it back to you, listeners, once again. Which two sentences would you change position in order for the paragraph to make more sense? Again, I'll give you a short moment to think about this. Write into the chat box, which two sentences should change position for this to make sense? So which two? Put two numbers into the chat box. Which sentences should change position? Which would you swap around? Okay, two, first, one, three. Okay, so I think people have identified that the first sentence is an issue. Okay. I think that's absolutely correct. Number one needs to change. For me, I would set it out like this. I would put, and congratulations if you had the same idea, because I think number one and number two need to change position. Um, the sentence in red is a clear topic sentence. It sets out the paragraph, and I think a good topic sentence will always um, will always end in a question. So there are many strong reasons why people need to make big changes to their life sometimes. Okay, tell me about them. What are they? And it suddenly makes sense if you do this change. Let's go through it quickly. There are many strong reasons why people need to make change to their life sometimes. If it's a new situation for a person, they can have the opportunity to learn and grow. A new job can make somebody change or get more skills, and a big change can be something which is better than the past. It's swapping around those two sentences suddenly makes it very easy to read. We have a topic sentence, and then we have the sentence in blue. And the function of the sentence in blue is to suggest, to develop the idea, to support it. And in this context, we've got a cause and effect idea. If it's a new situation, they can learn and grow. And it's a very important thing to build this idea of writing paragraphs with a clear central topic. And a clear central topic is a huge part of coherence and cohesion. So what we've done at this point is we've basically taken our students to think about what's gone wrong with a piece of writing from a colleague who could have been a colleague or a peer, but wasn't, was just in an earlier class. But what they've done is that they've thought about all this, and they've done 50% of the examiner's marks. They've thought about task response and coherence and cohesion, and that's nothing to do with grammar or vocabulary. They are understanding this from a top down. They're understanding this from a top down sense. The big idea, the task response, are you answering the question, to how you develop your ideas, and then we move to the nuts and bolts of how it's actually expressed, which is the vocabulary and the grammar. And of course, I say to them, right, here's what we did next. I said to the student, it's good, but you have to go away and rewrite me. And the student brought me back another draft, and here is this draft number 3. And at this point, I let them loose. I let the vulture within them free, and then they get this third paragraph to look at and think about in terms of lexical resource and grammatical range and accuracy. The questions here, they're there for a reason. They kind of review and revise the language that are in the band descriptors, you see. So in lexical resource, are there collocations or examples of uncommon language? Okay, that's the idea. That's in the band descriptors, the idea of uncommon language. Is it too basic? In grammar, tenses, agreement of singular and plural, punctuation, word forms. These are all things that the examiner is looking for and is in the band descriptors. Now, we're not going to read this one. We're not going to look through it because we are language teachers and we can obviously find what needs to be corrected here. But this is the point. You give them the language work to assess last. You get there via task response and coherence and cohesion. Now, I've taken these from the public band descriptors. And this relates to this idea of vocabulary. These are taken from 2 different bands. Uses less common lexical items with some awareness of style and collocation, and another band is attempts to use less common vocabulary, but with some inaccuracy. In the chat box here, which bands do you think these 2 statements from the rubric are from? Don't look at your band descriptors now. Don't go on Google and look it up. Instinctively, which 2 bands do you think the top one and the bottom are from? I'll give you 20 seconds just to get some ideas. And think about this. Uses less common lexical items with some awareness of style and collocation. What would that give you? And this word attempts to use less common vocabulary. Attempts to use, but with some inaccuracy. And this is the thing that I would suggest to everybody. The wording in the band descriptors has been chosen for a very, very particular reason. And it's the difference between, as many of you got there, the 7 and the 6. Uses less common lexical items and attempts to use less common lexical items. There's a big difference there. And this is it. From that point where they have analysed the vocabulary and grammar of the 40 paragraph, you can then say, okay, this student, this is what they ended up with. And then you say to them, I'm going to give you one more paragraph. And this is how I would have written it. This is the same paragraph, but the language has been upgraded. The language has been upgraded, and this is what I have done with it. Look at this rewritten answer. Think about all those things that we've studied: task response, coherence, cohesion, lexical resource, grammatical range and accuracy from the previous worksheet. How does this candidate achieve a high score? Okay, and this is this is something that I obviously wrote off the back of that previous paragraph. It's upgrading the language. Not there have many strong reasons, but there are many compelling reasons why. It's essentially a noticing activity where they can see that the difference between what has been produced at this level and what could be produced. And the question at the bottom asks them to have a look at it. What could you take from the example and use as your own? Again, depending on the group you have, it could be that you just, if they're an autonomous group, they choose which language. They choose which language that they would like to note down and maybe recycle again. And there are lots and lots of things that you could take out of this. It does develop the ideas. It does link things together. Firstly, a new job, for instance. Elsewhere, such efforts. This is kind of higher level stuff. And the main thing that I would suggest with students here is look at all of those wonderful collocations. Compelling reasons, significant changes, encounter a situation, provide an opportunity, etc., etc. If you want, you can give them that scaffolding and say, look, purely from this idea of using less common language and less common collocations, this is what a higher score looks like. And you give them the opportunity to recycle that. And you literally give them the opportunity to recycle that. So we've built up several stages to this wonderful paragraph here. It is a kind of a model answer. I don't believe in just giving students a perfect Band 9 full essay to look at without anything else. But this is an idea of building up to a very good essay. Just giving them a Band 9 essay and say, here, there you go, that's an example of something excellent. It's kind of like saying, well, there you go, there's a piece of writing. That's something you'll never be able to do. But if we can lead them to this very, very good answer and give them things that they could take out of it, that's providing support. That's providing development. And at this point, say to the students, right, I want you to write the next paragraph. Okay, so this paragraph here is clearly talking about the positive things of people making changes in their life, the good things. So what would the next paragraph logically be? Something about why people don't want to make changes. So at this point you say to your students, I want you to write that next paragraph and review and recycle the language that you might take out. And it could be those collocations. It could be this idiomatic language here. People feel the need from time to time, grow as a person. It could be any of that. It's up to them. But you tell them, I want you to write the next paragraph and use some of the language that I have given you here. Explain the fact that in the exam, if you did that, use the same language in one paragraph and the next, you lose credit for it. But at this point, then they can source the language that they need. They can mine that text. Here's an example from a student of mine who was at the point of teaching. He was band 4.5, possibly lower, but a clear 4.5. And this is the paragraph that this student produced for me. I will read it out because it might be a little difficult to read. However, excuse me, some people believe that they do not need to make considerable changes to their lives from time to time. First, there are lots of factors, it's not sure, when people change to a new situation. People need time to adapt to the new environment. It may be worse than before. A new job, for instance, it may not suit for people. They cannot do it as well as before. Secondly, a significant change can make your life become more difficult. You will be more stressed. Now, obviously there are issues here with the language. It is not perfect at all, but it's a huge step up. And it's this idea of take what we can work up to and then recycle it. It's just purely language development, but you are enabling language development in this IELTS writing context. So this is a really, really useful exercise I find with my students, and it's reasonably easy to do. Obviously, there was no previous student in another class. I just made it up. It's just a way to get the students kind of identifying and getting in that mindset of the examiner. So we are using those public band descriptors. We are teaching and learning with those public band descriptors. Just excuse me for a moment. I am currently losing my voice. I'm just going to mute the microphone. Yeah. So This is what we're doing. Taking what is on the public band descriptors, adapting it, and teaching from it. What about grammatical range and accuracy? What could we possibly do with grammatical range and accuracy? Well, let's have a look at that first of all. I think it's important for people to scrutinise what is actually written, as I've said earlier. There is a difference in a band 5 uses only a limited range of structures. In the band descriptors, the adjectives and adverbs are very important. Uses a mix of. Here we've got a noun, a mix of simple and complex. So the way that they're written, these band descriptors, is all important. A variety of. How do we get from uses only a limited through to a mix of simple and a variety of complex structures? Well, this is the thing. What is a variety? You know, you think to yourself, am I giving my students enough of a variety of complex structures to enable them to fulfill that criteria there? This is where I'm going to draw on a section from Mindset, level 3. In level 3, there's quite a bit that looks at the idea of function and how to think in terms of what a function is and cause and effect and contrast, concession, addition, giving specific examples. But in this section here, it's looking at a particular grammar focus of despite and although. And at this point, just to give you the background, at this point in this exercise, the students have read through, assessed and analysed an essay question. It is again a 40 essay question. So they've thought about the essay and what's wrong with it, and now we move on to the language work. I think that's the way to do it in an IELTS classroom, and indeed any language classroom. Bigger picture down to the bottom up, the nuts and bolts. So they have read this, they have done up to here. We are on question number 6 now, excuse me. And the question asks, which of the phrases are, this sentence here in italics is from the essay, okay? Despite the fact that people need to communicate regularly with their loved ones in order to be happy, it appears that physical contact is not as wide as one thought. And what happens is the question asks them, okay, this is from the essay. There are 3 sentences below. Which of the sentences paraphrase that underlined section correctly? And again, at this point, I'm going to hand over again to you guys listening. In the chat box, which of these 3 sentences are grammatically correct? I'll leave about 20 seconds or so for this. Okay, so which 2 are correct? Okay, getting 3s, few 3s, 1, 3, 3, 3, okay. Number 2 is actually incorrect. Despite people need is not the correct grammatically. It's not correct grammatically. It would be if the word despite was something different. The word despite was although. That would work. But what we've got here and what we're giving students is we've got 3 variations of this a despite clause. 3 variations. And they all stem from this functional idea of a contrast or a concession with the word but. People need to do this, but it appears. The word but is quite a simple one. Let's try and upgrade things, upgrade the complexity. So we've got 3 despite clauses here. We've got type 1, type 2 and type 3. Type 1 is despite the fact that, which is probably the least complex of all 3 really. It's just like saying although, and there's not much, but it's a step up from but certainly. Type 2 is despite plus ing. Type 3 is despite plus a noun phrase. I refer to them in class as type 1, type 2 and type 3. So when they get when they're doing the planning, I'm sort of monitoring their ideas. If they have a but idea, I would lean over and say, okay, that's a nice idea. Now think of come up with a type 2 despite clause for that. And it's a nice way because it gets rid of the meta language, like noun phrase despite plus ing. It's give me a type 1, give me a type 2, give me a type 3. And here's an example of how I did this recently. This is a question that was from that is in mindset level 3 again, about life expectancy and the advantages and disadvantages of increasing life expectancy. Um, Now, my students in this class, they are sort of 17 years old, most of them, and this is this is a fairly typical idea. They all came up with this idea for because when you're 17 and you get past the age of 30, then life is essentially over. And they all came up with this idea. People live for a longer time, but they don't enjoy themselves. They are too they're too old. Oh dear. Um, and this is the point. There's a but. We've got a but there. But they don't enjoy themselves. Okay, so then you say to the students, right, give me a type 1. Despite the fact that people live for a long time, comma, they don't enjoy themselves, they're too old. Immediately, we're kind of pushing up the level of complexity. Give me a type 2. Again, we're removing the word but, get rid of that, and then we've got despite people living. This is kind of, you could do the language, the language work that you're doing enables them to come up with this. I'm not just asking them to come up with it. We have looked at these examples and broken down what's going on grammatically. Type 3 is kind of a more complex one. Despite their longer lives, people don't enjoy themselves. Then it's all kind of raising the complexity and giving them what the examiner is looking for, a variety. What other variety can we get in this? Well, there's this idea of while. While people live for a longer time, they don't enjoy themselves. They're too old. So you're feeding in to them possibilities, structures that they could use to express an idea. Anything else that we could think of? Okay, let's have this one. The longer people live, the less they enjoy themselves. They're too old. So this is the same idea being expressed in a variety of ways. And as long as you work with them and develop their ability to use those structures, they have got a range. This is not quite the same thing. This is not a concession. The longer people live, the less they enjoy themselves is cause and effect. So they can see the kind of interchangeability of function and grammatical function and structure. So to give you a very specific example of this, this is a question that I'm going to show you again how it practically works in a classroom. And this is a class I had a couple of months ago about this question, about people going to university, more people going to university in the past, start work later, high qualifications. Is it positive or negative? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? So here's what I did. I got the class. There were 10 students in this class. I put them into pairs and said, I want you to come up with some ideas for this. You've got 3 minutes. And these are the ideas that they came up with. This is my writing. This is pictures off the whiteboard that they went up on. Idea number 1. Yeah, higher qualifications. Okay, but there's less practical knowledge you get if you do that too much. Perhaps gaining a degree is expensive, but you improve your job prospects. Because there are more and more people going into tertiary education, and as a result, maybe the quality of the qualifications is suffering. Huge choice of degrees, but maybe that could lead the student to make the wrong decision. And these were just the ideas that I put onto the board and said, right, let's go with these. And then asked them, let's try and put those language structures that we have studied into action. Try and find where these work. And here is the board. Now this, I wouldn't expect you to read this. You probably imagine people around the world now with their noses pressed against their computer screens. I'll break it down, but this is a picture of the board to prove, just to show you what was going on with the language work there. So let's break it down one by one. This idea of high qualifications, but people have the practical knowledge is not perhaps what it was. Okay, let's express that. So you can see here, this is the top part of the board. I've said, first of all, let's do a while structure here. And that is my handwriting on the board there, while that you can see in black pen. I didn't give them that. That was, I promise you, elicited from this class. And they were good. They were a high-level class. We are level 3 here. Isn't that a lovely sentence from that idea? That simple idea is now become, while a great number of people today leave university with good qualifications, they often have less practical knowledge of the world. Good. Can you do it in a different way, though? I asked them. Can you do it with despite? Well, yes, they can. And you can see here that um, that's their handwriting. That is their various examples of their handwriting. And they're doing this really nicely. They're using the same idea, but they're piggybacking different language structures onto that idea. And they're pretty good there, despite a greater number of people leaving university. I'm not going to break down the way that this works because you're the language teacher. You know, you can understand how this works and then show them. But you are giving them a range, an opportunity to hit those high scores. Here's another one. Choice degrees is huge. Students might make the wrong decision. It could be a but. It could be a so. It depends on how you want to see it. It could be a contrast. It could be a cause and effect. Well, here's a cause and effect. This is, again, you can see that they've written this on the board. And we go from this hypothetical language. If the choice of degrees was not as huge, students might make better decisions when choosing a degree. You're showing them what goes with what structures go to express a particular idea. With this group, as I say, they were higher level, so I've got this thing called a turbo hypothetical, which is hypothetical with an extra injection of something. Were there not such a huge choice of degrees, a student might. And think about what's going on here with the level of complexity. There's a huge amount of good stuff coming out here. Remember back to this one. If it is a new situation for someone, they can have the opportunity to grow as a person. That's from the earlier essay that we were looking at. If life was always the same, they wouldn't have the opportunity to grow. So you're always trying to push them and think, you're expressing a particular idea, but it's the language that enables you to get there. Don't try and think of many, many different ideas. We've all had students in IELTS who think, "Oh, I haven't got very good ideas for that. I don't know what to say." If you help them have the language, they don't need to have a huge number of ideas. This one, gaining a degree is costly, but better job prospects at the end. And you can see at this point, as I say, it was a high-level group. I was really pushing them at this point. How gaining a degree is expensive, but better job prospects. And this is what I wrote on the board for them to fill in. The more time consuming into, and gave them the verb and asked them, how would you transform that to fill those gaps? And what would you put in that gap? Now, obviously, this is complex stuff. I am really pushing them. But as I said at the beginning, this is scalable. All you have to do is think about what's going on in your class. Okay, who in your class can do this? Can they all do it? Let's scale it down a little bit. Maybe I wouldn't give them that if they were a little lower. I might give them something like this, or encourage them or elicit something like this. The harder a student works, it's still the same. You've still got a complex structure there. Maybe the language isn't quite as high level, or even this. The more difficult a degree is, the more the employer respects the graduate. Because what the principle here is, it's not what they can do. They will be limited. But if you can kind of get them to think, what structures, what grammar, what complexities have I got that enable me to express an idea, then I can then develop my ideas and I can put these into the essay and hopefully impress the examiner. Because a variety of complex structures. There it is in Band 7. There it is, clear as day. That's what they are looking for. They're looking for something that kind of does more than just a mix of simple and complex. So as I say, it depends on the level of your class. The level of your class is all important. If they're not capable of doing what I've just shown you, think about it in terms of what they could do. But you've got different areas there. The plus comparative, comma, the plus comparative. Scale it down a little bit. Hypothetical ideas. Don't go in with a turbo hypothetical if your students are, band 5, 5.5, but get them to see how language and ideas and function connect. And it forms part of a fuller planning process. And this is the all important thing. Generally speaking, people go about it in this way. They get some ideas, they read the exam question, they brainstorm some ideas, get some ideas together. They choose what they want to say, and then they think about how they're going to structure it. I mean, that's if you're lucky. To be honest, some of my students just spend about 10 seconds on that, and then immediately jump straight to this one. They start scribbling away with some ideas that haven't even been developed. My point is there is a missing part of the planning process. And I'm going to open this to the floor again. In the chat box, could anybody suggest what the missing part, the missing stage of the planning process is? What would number 4 say? Think about what I've been suggesting in terms of piggybacking structures and complexity onto ideas. How would you summarize that in 2 words for number 4 here? I'll give you 20-30 seconds. Any suggestions what we could put in here, which I think is a hugely, hugely, hugely important part of the process. Yes, yes, yes. I think we've got a couple of people, I think, who are coming through with the right idea here. We've got Janie and Daria. I think you've hit the nail on the head. Few people coming in with some ideas. Anna, yes, that's exact. Collocations, good idea. Kira, right, plan your language. I tell my students that's possibly what you'd spend most time on, because they spend too much time, far too much time thinking about, oh, I can't think of brilliant ideas. That's not the point. You come up with simple ideas, you develop them, and then you express them with the right language. And if you have shown them the language that goes on to which ideas, then they can spend the time looking at that. Now, here's another question. I'm going to actually show you an example of what one of my students came up with. And this is a question that I gave them, and I'm just going to give you a moment to think about this. Not necessarily to put anything into the chat box. You can if you wish. But for this particular question, let's start thinking about how you could actually develop this question. What language structures would you initially think would go with which ideas? So if you've got any ideas for elaborate just this idea of what you would do in a classroom. So we've got this idea of countries becoming more and more similar. People are able to buy the same products anywhere in the world. Can you think of a cause and effect idea? Can you think of imagine that you're in the planning stage. Can you think of a cause and effect idea for this? Can you think of a concession, a despite? Maybe you could think of a specific example or something like this. Tatiana, yes, there's certainly a comparative structure. There are comparative structures. The more. Yes, Lynn, thank you. You've got the more. These ideas will start coming to you when you look at it. Any exam question, if you're doing this in the right way, you're looking at the ideas, and as you're kind of brainstorming, what can I say? You start to get this idea of how can I say it? It takes a while for your students to get there because they've got to start thinking in a different way, because that part of the procedure of planning the language is all but forgotten for most of my students. And I'm gonna show you. I'm gonna give you an example of something that one of my students gave me recently for this question. And this is somebody who he was struggling. He was one of these people who just got stuck on the same score again and again, and he couldn't seem to get above a sort of 5.5 in writing. He did once, I think, get a 6, but he was just stuck on that score, and he needed to get higher. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you an example or two from an essay that he wrote for me, and let's have a think of what he's doing well here. So people buying the same products anywhere in the world, countries becoming more and more similar. Here's a little paragraph here. Not only can the ability to purchase products from other countries ensure top quality products, but also accelerate the improvement of the international economy. Hang on a minute. What we've got here is something I actually didn't show you before. Not only can this happen, not only does this happen, but this also happens. So we've got this idea of functionally, this is addition, this and this, but there's another complex structure here as well. This is adverbial inversion, negative adverbial inversion. Not only can the ability to purchase products, but also it's really nice. And look at the second sentence. It's got a despite clause there. Despite the pressure given by the international market, despite the pressure given. Can anybody remember from type 1, 2, or 3? If you can. Which was this here that he's given here? 1, 2, or 3? Is it a despite type 1, despite type 2, despite type 3? Darius straight in there with a number 3. Everyone's got a title. Yeah, it's a lovely noun phrase, isn't it? Despite the pressure given by the international market. And we've got, despite the pressure given by, there's a nice kind of passive there as well. At this point, you know, you've got ticking boxes for the examiner. But you've also got teaching points here. Countries will be able to buy the same products they don't have. This will help the development. Well, maybe this is a teaching point here where you talk about modality. This could help, or this would help. Again, you are scaffolding them and supporting them all the way to produce better and better work. Next one. Oh, look, we've immediately got a nice while. While society is enjoying all these benefits, some people are concerned that countries might lose their own characteristics due to this globalization. It's lovely. It's really, really good. And again, you can see here there's another inversion. However, I believe under no circumstances will countries let their culture disappear like that, despite some special cases. Now, this is a practice in class. He's got some lovely writing going on here. Possibly, we don't want to overdo it. But the essay is here for them to practice the despite clauses, practice the inversion. And the last paragraph here, moreover, the world has been way more peaceful than a century ago due to the development of international trading. The more trades two countries do, the less chance there is for a war to happen. We've got the more, the less there. If there weren't these many trades happening between countries, the world might not be as safe as it is today. A lovely hypothetical language. But again, an important teaching point here. And this is when you go with the student, you go back to the band descriptors and say, look at that, you've got some lovely grammatical structures there. But in one other of the criteria, we've got a problem. And which criteria, this particular section, can anybody tell me which particular criteria we encounter a little bit of a problem? Grammatical range and accuracy, lexical resource, coherence and cohesion, or task response. Any ideas, anybody? Well, thinking back to the fact that this question was about people can buy the same products around the world, and it's leading to countries becoming more and more similar. We have a problem here, and this is what we spoke about, me and this student and I spoke about this. It is task response. This is not really answering the question. It's not answering the question because it's talking about wars and not products. So it's a good opportunity to put a teaching point across. The language is beautiful though, I think, and he took on everything that we were doing in class. And this is somebody who could really see this principle of, I've got this idea, how do I express it? I express it with that structure. And it's quite a simple principle, but once they get it, then it does become it becomes a great help to them. And it was a real help to this student because this is somebody who, as I say, he got stuck on getting band 5.5 and 6. Everything else was fine, but the writing was a problem. And I'm sure many of you out there have the same situation that you've seen many times if you've been teaching arts for a while. This kind of, I can't seem to get past this. But this student took an arts test at the beginning of the year, and he managed to get 7.5 overall and 6.5 in writing, which meant that he managed to meet the English language requirements for his university choice. at UCL in London. Um, and it's basically because he took on board what was being done in class. You know, this is somebody who worked at it. Um, there's a question just come through from Stamattina about scores for this one. I wouldn't necessarily give this a score because what he's doing here is he's practicing um, what we were doing in class, and perhaps you know he's overdone one or two structures, but I think this is really nice language. You know, maybe we should hand it over to the floor again. I mean, let's have a quick look about what he's done. Not only can the ability, despite the pressure given by international markets, in terms of grammatical range and accuracy, while society is enjoying all these benefits, I believe, however, I believe under no circumstances will the countries, if we're thinking purely in terms of a range of structures, what would we give it? What would everybody give it out there? Is this kind of does it feel like a band 5, a band 6, band 7? Any ideas? Anybody from who's listening? Yeah, Darry thinks 7. Okay. For grammatical range, a 7. It's definitely not a 6, is it? Yeah. So this, and I know that this student had problems with grammar because of the mistakes they were making. This for me is showing a grammatical range of 7. It probably wouldn't be an 8 because there are one or two many kind of small mistakes. But we're getting towards that point of wow, look at that. There's a range. So this is the whole point here. We're looking at developing the language, developing the principles of the language that are fixed to this whole process. So let's have a think about what we've done. The task I showed you at the beginning, where you take a paragraph that is from a peer who used to be in the class, who, obviously this peer was completely invented by me, but it's a useful way of getting the students to kind of objectively look at a piece of work. You take them through the process, and you say, do not start with looking at grammar. Do not start with grammar or choice of vocabulary. Start by understanding how it develops. Start by looking at how the paragraph flows. Those two band descriptors, task response, coherence, cohesion, are all important. 50% of your marks. And you can upgrade that language in those essays. They're not that difficult to write. You can put them together, and you can say, well, this is what somebody has given me. Let's look at it. We've all done that. We've kind of invented language to upgrade and to work on. So you can give them model essays. My point is you can give them model essays, but not just put a model essay in front of them and say, there you go, that's well beyond your means. Build up to it, and then pull language out of it, and then help them to recycle it. This idea of compelling reasons. It's such a lovely collocation, and if someone puts that in an essay rather than good reasons or strong reasons, it does help. Hopefully you've seen that there's a couple of ideas about the band descriptors. You as teachers can use them. Don't use them as a whole. Just look at individual points and think, what does that effectively mean a candidate needs to do, and how can I teach that? So this idea of a variety of structures rather than a mix of simple and complex. And this idea of function. What is your idea? Have you got a contrast idea here? Is it cause and effect? What's going on? And once you've done that, you can identify what structure is actually good for expressing that. And hopefully you can see that there are a range of structures that are available for everything. So thank you very, very much for listening and joining us today, everybody. It's been an absolute pleasure to host you. I am. You can get in touch with me here if from the top link, and also the bottom link takes you to a recording. There's a film of my IELTS talk from last week, which goes into this idea of developing students' understanding of function, not just from a language point of view, but also helping them to identify which function that is coming out when when they're in that planning, brainstorming process. So yeah, feel free to watch that. Feel free to get in touch. And thanks ever so much. Hope you found at least something useful in there.
Many thanks, Greg. That was a really useful session. We've got about 2 minutes to take questions from the floor. So if anyone has any questions, please do type them in the chat box now. We've also got some useful links on the screen right now that will help you with your teaching. And also the certificate of attendance should be on the screen now. So you should be able to click on the item and then download. As I said earlier, if you're on a smartphone or a tablet, you probably won't be able to do this, but there's an email address on the screen right now. So drop us an email and we'll be able to send you a copy. So let's see some questions. We've got Kira has asked, she says that Band 7 says the essay produces frequent error-free sentences, whilst Band 8 says the majority is error-free. So how can we clarify how much is the majority? Greg, I don't know if this is something you can help with.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of you have to kind of go on your interpretation of it, really. I mean, like I said earlier on, the words that are chosen are there for a reason, and if the majority of sentences are error-free, I'm not necessarily, I can't put a number on it because it depends on how, how many sentences there are. But if you look at a piece of writing and most of it is kind of it's there, great, you're going to get an A. If a lot of sentences have a small mistake, then the examiner may will probably not be able to overlook that. The main thing is, do the mistakes impede communication? So if there's an error that makes you stop when you're reading it, then that's quite a biggie. But if it's kind of like, that they might have once or twice left off a third person S or something like that, then that might be sort of overlooked. But if you get a situation where there's some really really good stuff, but there is very very every sentence has a mistake, then that's going to take you down. To be honest with you, it's difficult to quantify, and really it's up to you to sort of look at your students' work and think majority. You can put a percentage on it, but I'd hesitate to do that because you do get credit from the examiner for kind of pushing what you're doing. So I don't know. It's a difficult one to answer. It's a difficult one to quantify and say that if you do X number of mistakes, if you make X number of mistakes, then you get Band 6. If they're noticeable, then that will sort of limit you to sort of Band 6. But again, if you're producing some really nice language, then it could be that it's kind of frequent error-free sentences, which is a Band 7. So frequent is frequent and the majority. That's what I'd say there. What's the difference between something that happens frequently and happens the majority of the time? Band 8 is difficult to get in anything. So the majority is a lot, really, isn't it?
Okay, thank you, Greg. On the screen now, everyone should be able to see a link to our series of webinars. If you have time, please do pop over to the YouTube channel. There's lots of useful videos for you there. We've got Greg and some of the other mindset authors presenting. So thank you again to Greg. It's a fantastic session. Thank you to everyone for joining us, and have a fantastic rest of the day. Bye.
Bye-bye.